From the Evening Standard in London, I'm Mark Blunden, and this is the Standard Podcast.
I feel a profound sense of urgency because more will change in the next 5 years than in the last 30. I'm convinced that the next few years will be some of the most dangerous, yet the most transformational that our country has ever known.
The Prime Minister has sought to brush off Labour claims of 14 years of Tory failure and portray his party as the best place to lead Britain. Rishi Sunak set out his election stall to Britain's voters with talk of being trusted to keep families safe and warning of increasing dangers facing the nation. And with calls to name the day for Britain to go to the polls growing louder, the Prime Minister painted at times a bleak picture, twice raising the prospect of a nuclear-level threat. But at the same time, he stressed the opportunities for dramatic positive developments, significantly due to artificial intelligence, including a generational breakthrough in the battle against cancer. Sunak gave the speech at the Policy Exchange think tank in central London before Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer met his party's regional mayors, including the capital's Sadiq Khan, at a pre-general election summit in Wolverhampton. This all happened following a slightly strange foreign policy development as Vladimir Putin removes Russia's defence secretary, but his Security Council replacement has an economics as opposed to a military background. To unravel what it all means, the Standard Podcast is joined from the Commons by Evening Standard political editor Nicholas Cecil. Nick, what's the significance of Monday's political schedule in terms of agenda setting for General Election 24?
Well, what was interesting this morning is that Rishi Sunak gave a speech which sounded very much like a general election speech. It was very broad-ranging. It covered lots of domestic issues as well as foreign affairs. So I suspect it may spark fresh speculation that the general election could be sooner rather than later. The Prime Minister repeated his stance that the general election is likely to be in the second half of the year, but obviously that could include July. I don't think it will. I think it will still be an autumn general election because the Tories need more time for the economy to recover. But just that the tone and the type of speech he gave today was very much the kind of speech you'd expect before a general election.
What was all the doom from Sunak about?
Well, it was certainly quite worrying in some aspects. He was saying that basically the next few years ahead will see as much change as in the last 30 years or so, and that there are a number of real and increasing dangers. That those were his words. And you can see them. You can see we've got war in Ukraine with Putin's invasion, and we've also got conflict in the Middle East. And interestingly, the Prime Minister raised the prospect twice of a nuclear level threat. So possible a nuclear incident in relation to the war in Ukraine, and also in relation to artificial intelligence. So what the experts are telling us on AI is that while it has got very positive potential effects, on the other hand, there are also potential very malign and negative impacts, including in the worst case scenario, a possible existential threat to mankind. So Mr. Sunak's speech, I think it will certainly raise eyebrows, some of the language that he used. And his core message was that we're in an increasingly insecure world and that people should trust the Conservatives rather than Labour. And I think his key phrase was, trust me to keep you and your family safe. Now, he's talking there both safe in terms of defence and physical security, but also economic security. And many families up and down the country are suffering during the cost of living crisis. They may not take too kindly to being told by the Tory Prime Minister that it's his party which is best placed to look after them, given the chaos under Liz Truss and the mini budget, and also the turbulence in the Boris Johnson years.
And what about Sir Keir's Monday Mayors meeting?
Obviously, Labour did very well in the local elections, winning the West Midlands mayoralty, easily winning the mayoralty in London, where Sadiq Khan beat Susan Hall. So Sir Keir Starmer is hosting a meeting of all the mayors who won for the first time or who retained power. And they were seeking to do some brainstorming to come up with ideas so they can all learn from each other and develop, in their words, or in Sir Keir Starmer's words, the gold standard of how to level up the country. And so he's very much stressing that a Labour government would raise living standards for everyone in the country. And that's a core to Labour's message, is asking voters, do they feel better off after 14 years of Tory government or not? And certainly at the moment, a lot of people would say that they don't.
How will Labour's local elections' big wins feed into the party's general election planning?
Well, I think there's a danger that you read too much across from local elections to national elections, because they can be quite different. Often local elections are fought on local issues. So people will be wary about taking too much from the local election results. But obviously these elections on May the 2nd, we had a by-election in Blackpool South, which Labour won very convincingly. We had also a number of mayoralties. So these local elections were a bit broader this time. And I think that what will emerge from these elections is that Labour will get an extra boost, an extra spring in their step from having done very well. Whereas the Tories, it was the opposite. They lost nearly 500 local council seats. We've even seen some more MPs, such as Nadeem Zahawi, announcing they're going to stand down at the general election. So Rishi Sunak faces a big struggle, to convince the country that his party is the party for the future after 14 years of Tory rule, and also to keep his party together as more and more MPs decide that actually their future might be better outside politics rather than inside it.
Let's go to the ads. Coming up, Natalie Elphicke defection row latest. Why not hit follow? In the meantime, give us a rating. Welcome back. Nick, could you bring us up to speed with the latest on the row over Natalie Elphicke's defection to Labour?
This row gets deeper and deeper. So Keir Starmer may have thought he'd scored a quick and easy victory of getting another defector from the Tories. So Natalie Elphicke followed Dan Poulter in crossing the floor to Labour from the Tories. But there hasn't been a huge deal of controversy about Mr Poulter's move. But Natalie Elphicke is very much seen as a right-winger, a right-wing Tory. So lots of Labour MPs are really quite unhappy about her being in their party. And now there's this controversy about allegations, which she denies, that she tried to get the Justice Secretary, who was at the time was Sir Robert Buckland, to intervene in her husband's court case. So this story emerged at the weekend. She denies it, but now both parties are coming from different angles, but saying that it should be looked into. So defections are normally good news for the party receiving the MP who's coming across the floor. But there are a number of commentators saying that actually this casts questions over Sir Keir Starmer's judgment, given that she clearly, from what she said in the past, is someone on the right of the political spectrum, and you wonder, why is she joining Labour?
And also some potentially significant developments in Putin's cabinet. What do we know?
The long-serving Defence Minister, Sergei Shoigu, he's been replaced by an economist as Defence Minister. So not by a military man, but an economist. And the view is that Putin has realised he can't win his war in Ukraine quickly. So he's trying to settle into a very long-term plan to win the war. But that means making Russia's economy very much a war economy over the long term, and hoping that the West will eventually tighten its support for Ukraine. So the West has wobbled a bit, with Republicans in Washington a big aid package for Kyiv. That has now been resolved, that issue. So more equipment will be flowing to Ukraine armed forces shortly in coming weeks. So basically the war in Ukraine has been largely bogged down in the east of the country. Russian forces more recently have been making advances because the Ukrainian troops were outgunned and outnumbered. But certainly Kyiv and its allies in the West are very much hoping that those Russian offences will be thwarted in coming weeks and months as the Ukrainian forces get better equipment again.
Finally, is there much policy diversion on Russia between the Tories and Labour?
This is another issue where there is very little difference between the government and Labour. So both are very firmly supportive of Ukraine. And it's worth remembering that Britain has very much led on this in terms of first supplying anti-tank weapons, then challenged the 2 tanks, and the long-range Storm Shadow missile. So while Britain may not be the biggest supplier of military equipment to Ukraine, it certainly has pushed the envelope and urged other allies to do the same and to provide more support for Ukraine, because there's a view that if Putin wins in Ukraine, he's not going to stop there. He will then maybe look to the Baltics or another country in Eastern Europe to pursue his invasion plans.
There's more on these stories in the Evening Standard newspaper and online at standard.co.uk. We're back tomorrow at 4 p.m.